if you don't apply it to their lives, then they're just going to move on to the next video. I mean, video is easy to get out nowadays, but there's a lot of people with videos out there, and they're just going to scroll on to the next one.
What we argue again with Liberty Spenders in this effort is people are looking for that. They want that. They're asking for more of that from their brands and businesses and who they interact with.
I really believe that you can produce a 3 to 5 minute video as long as it keeps people's attention.
Hello, and welcome to the Liberty Spenders podcast. We are Kurt and Kristen Łuthart, your hosts and co-founders of the Prosper Group, an agency that's raised over $500 million and helped elect over 100 members of Congress, 15 governors, 15 U.S. senators, and 1 president. And now, in addition to helping political candidates get elected, we're helping your business get elected by answering this question. How could you exponentially grow your business by tapping into an engaged and lucrative audience that we call Liberty Spenders? Liberty Spenders are politically conservative or faith-based consumers. They make up roughly 40% of the country, and they're looking to buy from businesses and brands that align with their values. If you want to learn more, you can check out our new best-selling book for free at libertyspenders.com/free.
Our guest today is Kyle Justice, who's an Emmy-nominated television producer. He established his company in 1999, operating 3 primary corporate divisions. He has Compel Media, which does corporate video production, Awesome Science Media, which we're going to talk about today because I have been checking that out. And as a parent with a couple of kids, awesome is a good word for it. And Awesome Sci TV, which is a direct-to-consumer on-demand platform for some of that content. But over the years, Kyle's produced some really awesome stuff for major networks like ESPN, National Geographic, Outdoor Channel, Fox Sports, and Comcast Sportsnet. His nonprofit clients have included Answers in Genesis, who've been on our podcast, by the way.
Yep.
Blue Letter Bible and Medical Teams International. His corporate clients, it includes some very little-known brands like Nike, HP, Cisco, and Broadcom.
We're really scraping the bottom of the barrel here, let me tell you.
Hey, Kyle's has 8 children. He's been married since 91, 8 kids. I have 2, and I think, how will I survive? So let's audible. I want to talk about the 8 kids. What ages are they?
Thanks for having me here. Every year they change. So,
right.
You got to keep up. That's a big list to run down. It's like, way to put him on the spot there, Kurt. That's not right. That's not right.
Well, it ranges between 27 and 10. So
okay.
The 17-year mark. Yeah. So quite a range, about 2.5 years. People ask us, are you a blended family? And it's like, no,
right.
all came from us. Or if we have any twins, and it's like, no, we don't. So
nope, we just really like each other. And that's kind of what happens someday.
The other question is, are you Mormon or Catholic? It's like, no, we're not. Everyone early on, it's like, do you guys know how this works? What kind of question is that?
We figured it out by child 7, but it was too late to stop.
Yeah. Lots of practice. I mean, practice makes, there's no perfect, I suppose, but right. Not in this, but, we're thrilled to have you as well, Kyle. Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we're on the opposite spectrum. We started our family late. I know like I'm 25, but I'm actually 45. We have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old. And so when I had learned about Awesome Science Media, that intrigues me because, 10 years ago, content for kids, good quality content, Christian content for kids wasn't really on my radar. I would have thought, oh, that's cool. Now it's definitely on my radar. And because it's so hard to find, really. And, either it's just doesn't exist or it's boring, and maybe some of the science experiments are a little above my 2.5-year-old's comprehension, but he likes to see stuff blow up. So he might like the episode I was just watching on your YouTube channel of blowing up a toilet. So This seems like quite the project. How did this awesome science TV thing get started? What inspired you? Tell us a little bit of the story.
Yeah, you look back on your life and it's like, how did I get into this? Yeah, what was kind of fun is that my dad's hobby was filmmaking, and he was an electrical contractor. I have a twin brother, and we both, I think the Star Wars series came out, Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars, when we were kids. I'm 55. And so I was just a kid when that came out and got into video. We were blessed where our local educational system in Portland, Oregon had a whole television program. And so my dad had video equipment. I mean, we just from an early age, around 11, we started doing animation and so on, and really enjoyed it, loved it. It was a passion. In Ephesians, in the Bible, Ephesians 2:10, it talks about how God has works for you planned for the creation of the world. And you're also born in a place and a time and a family and a location specifically for different purposes that I believe God has put you there for. And we plugged into that, and I had a passion for video. When I was in high school, at a high school camp, we had a speaker come out, and he talked about the scientific evidences for the Bible and history and the flood. And it was very intriguing to me. And I was already doing video, and I thought, well, maybe someday I could, put those two together and, produce some really cool content. And then through the 90s, I worked for different organizations, Family Channel, Moody Bible Institute, finally started my company in 99. And in 97, I did our first Creation Kids project called the 𝗙𝗏 Show. And that was in junction with a brand new ministry called Answers in Genesis, where Ken Ham was just getting started. And we co-produced it with them. And then we moved from the East Coast back to the West Coast to raise our family, and started my company, started doing work for big networks, kind of got out of the creation side of things for a while. And then in 2010, my oldest son, Noah, was about 12 years old, and we decided we're going to take a road trip to the national parks on the West Coast from Yellowstone to the Grand Canyon. But I took my video equipment with me, and my oldest son, Noah, was out there. I mean, he was doing dramas and so on. So we were like, well, hey, let's put him in front of the camera at the Grand Canyon and have him talk about how the Colorado River couldn't have run uphill. And if you look at the evidence, the 𝗙𝗏𝘁𝗵 Plateau rose up, and it shouldn't have gone through the Grand Canyon unless there was a catastrophe. And so I had already studied a lot of this material. And when we got back, I was looking at it. It's like, wow, there's some really good content here. Called my friends at Answers in Genesis and asked them, hey, if I produce a series called Awesome Science, would you guys sell it? And they're like, oh, yeah, we'd love it. Because in this area of kids content, yeah, there's stuff about Bible. There's Adventures in Odyssey that focus on the family does. But there's not a whole lot in the area of teaching kids about scientific evidences for their faith, for what the Bible says about the flood, about creation. And we started creating this content, and pretty quick, we got a distributor, Master Books, and they started basically going to the homeschool market. And we had a deal with Answers in Genesis to sell directly to them. And so it really took off. And so that then spurred us on into other opportunities. We did a series on how the flood impacted the surface of the earth through different scientists. We take field trips. We had another series on astronomy and the Bible. Not necessarily for kids, because we weren't just kids specific. We did other programs like Debunking Evolution, and that was for high school students, about those who are going to public high school and they're reading through the biology books. And it's like, all this evolution, how do I respond to this in my faith in God's word? And we worked with a group called Genesis Apologetics to produce that. And it kept going. We have another series called Science Foundations. That's 75 episodes for kids on a lot of different topics of science now that we produce. And there's other series, and we produced Awesome Science Labs, which you saw, the exploding toilet. And that was a little dangerous, but a lot of fun to produce. And so over the years, we've sold a lot of DVDs, and then as DVDs, as you know, there's not that many people buying DVDs anymore. And so we had to look at other ways to transform our business and get that content out. We also work with different networks. I mean, there's a phrase in the industry called content is king. And if you own the content, then you can take that content and sell it and license it and distribute it. And we had also a passion for world missions. And so as we went to different trade shows, like the National Religious Broadcasters Show, we were able to connect with people from around the world, Romania, Australia, South Africa. And we have provided our programming to them. Some license it, sometimes we give it to them as world outreach in a sense. And we're doing some research too on how to translate our content into other languages using AI. And that's a whole nother, conversation right there. Excuse me, right there. So that's a long answer. I hope I covered the gamut there.
So I think that is fascinating, Kyle. And of course, I'm now picking up this trend. Now, did this trend of sticking in with science, I heard a little bit how you got started, but was that intentional, or is that just something that, hey, once I get going, I'm good at this. I've now built a reputation for this. I have the experts in mind to bring in, or was that intentional?
I think if you look back on my story, there was a passion for science and the Bible. I would have loved to have been an archaeologist. I would love to have.
Okay, there it is.
Just because there's this inquisitiveness about that. Like I said, when I was in high school and I heard the scientists talk, there was just a spark, I think, in me where God was opening that door for doing something in the future. And I didn't even know what it was. I generally am very inquisitive. It's funny, when I first met my wife, when we were 14, out at a church camp, our first whole conversation was about creation in the Bible. So I guess it was. Yeah, there was a passion there for that. And so it's an exciting thing. And I think the other thing is that there's so little content out there, and yet it's a foundational issue to people's faith. A lot of Christian families raise their kids in church and youth group, and then they go off sometimes to a secular college, and within the first 3 months, their faith is gone. It's because of this exposure, and they don't necessarily have the answers. They don't know how to. Some of the evidences that are presented, they're like, "Gee, I don't know. That sure seems convincing. Maybe I need to distrust the Bible," and it's a process. Right. And so, to me, this is a very foundational issue. It's not just fun. It's not just, inquisitiveness. It's building a foundation for other parents and kids so that they can continue in their faith. And, Paul in Scripture talks about having an answer for the faith that you believe.
Yes.
And this is one of those things that we're providing answers. Now, granted, in that verse, it continues to go on to say, but don't, make sure your answers are in gentleness and not, motivated like, oh yeah, here's the answer and here's why you're wrong.
Exactly.
It's like, no, this is why I believe what I believe. And I think generally, a lot of people have never heard a lot of these evidences for Scripture, for the flood, dinosaurs. People are like, how do you put dinosaurs into the Bible? And just even recent discoveries about soft tissue in dinosaurs and blood cells and collagen and all these things that, wait a minute, aren't those bones supposed to be 65 million years old? How can you have blood cells inside? Aren't they all fossilized? It's like, well, not if they're just a few thousand years old, like the Bible says. So that really wakes people up and go, wow, maybe there is evidence for Scripture and for what I believe and for the biblical timeline. So that's exciting to me to be able to get that in the hands of students and parents and to encourage them and set a firm foundation in their lives.
Well, I definitely agree. And I think, I was definitely one of those people that, this is, again, as we've discussed early in our parenting journey, figuring out that balance of helping them understand faith in a simple way, but knowing as they grow older that this is not some fairy tale. This isn't just some like nice story. that we back it up and that we add depth to it and meat on the bones, because there is so much. And while I don't have the same proclivity for the science element of it, I have that same passion for understanding worldview and philosophy and breaking that down. Because when you compare Christianity with other faiths, other I don't even like to call them religions, but the competing worldviews and the competing thoughts, I mean, it just doesn't hold a candle. And so I think what you're doing is just so important. And it's got to be so much more fulfilling when you yourself are also interested outside of the video and the production. But the subject matter sounds like it's close to your heart as well.
It is. I love learning and then creating content that is entertaining, that kids love to watch, but something they can take back and remember. It's amazing to me that some of our content, we didn't necessarily design it for the younger ages, but like our Awesome Science series, it was more preteen in that area, junior high, maybe early high school. But we have reports back that parents are showing it to their 7-year-olds and they're retaining that information. So that's very rewarding in a sense to go, wow, okay, so kids are just soaking it in. And I think not underestimating the ages and the way that they consume content nowadays, and they retain that information. But we just don't want them to retain the information. We want them to make sense and to think critically about that. We're just not saying, hey, this is the way you need to think. Even in a lot of our videos and content, even for kids, we're like, well, this is what the Bible says. This is what the naturalism says. And here's the evidence, and how does it match up? And we teach them to think critically and go, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The Bible, the other side doesn't as much. Wow. Okay. Now I have this foundation that I can go out with. So it's exciting.
So how has the transition gone from moving from DVDs to on demand? How are people finding you today compared to how they did before? What's that look like?
Yeah, we're totally taking advantage of your knowledge base to help other people who are trying to navigate this and don't have your proclivity and your background.
I think originally when we first started producing content, it was all on DVD. That's how people did consume their content. We had our little online store. We went to a few conventions, but really the majority of our customers were people like Answers in Genesis and other ministries and different retailers. We did a little bit on Amazon. And this was in 2012 is when we first released the DVD set. And I mean, granted, we probably sold between 100,000 and 200,000 DVDs of our content over the last 13 years. And so it's there. You were starting to see even then different DVDs would have insert cards that would give you a digital copy. And so I researched that early on so that we would provide that service to our customers. But like I said, a lot of it was we were wholesaling most of our DVDs to retailers. And we still do that. They don't have the same demand as they used to, but they still order DVDs. And the funny thing is we have our own online store and we still sell DVDs, maybe 2 to 5 orders a week. So it's not huge, but it is there because I think people are a little leery of the online platforms. And what if they go away, or what if I stop subscribing? And they have that content still there. I think when censorship was really big several years ago, people were like, oh my gosh, well, I need to own a copy of this. And that's really good.
Well, censorship in your pocketbook. You're paying to access this stuff over and over and over again. You don't own any of it.
Yeah, no, that's true. And some people like that, and we're glad to accommodate them for sure. But in about 2017, we had a couple of different platforms where people would retain their digital copies. And, of course, Netflix was up and coming and some other platforms. And I started doing research on what it would take to build our own platform and found one that I thought worked well, that wasn't too expensive to get started. And started Awesome Sci TV @𝗕𝗂𝗶𝘁𝗵. And we've gone through 2 or 3 platforms. We now have a vendor called Uscreen that we really like that hosts our platform. And homeschool families, they can either get a yearly subscription or a monthly subscription. Right now, it's mostly all of our content. We have over 50 hours of content on the subject. Well, and it's for kids, but it's also some geared towards adults. A lot of kids will not necessarily enjoy the flood geology series. Maybe some high school kids will. So it's more scientific in nature, and we have a wide audience, and that's really encouraging. We have some study guides and so on. Kind of the next iteration of what we're working on right now is creating a whole another level or another tier on our platform for teachers and homeschool teachers and families that have study guides for every video, that has curriculum guides for every series and every season, so that they can grab those and download those. I'm creating word find puzzles, for every episode with glossary words and so on. So that's what I'm working on right now, to create a tier. I know that Trump, coming into office, he has made a promise to help homeschool families, providing some amount of funding that would go towards curriculum. And I hope that we can kind of jump on that with the Liberty Spenders and others, that they would use that funding to say, hey, we want to use this content for our science curriculum. There's Christian schools and maybe even some churches that would be interested in using that as well. So we're not just status quo. We're always trying to create new content and other valuable products that people can use.
Well, I think, and I'm sorry, I'm so passionate about what you're doing. I got to zip my mouth here for a minute, but it's really powerful what you were just describing, because you know your audience and you know what they need and where things are going. And so I just want to commend you for that. And again, those guides, when you're describing what you're providing, word search games, my eyes are lighting up. These are things that really make this content effective. Like you said, you give multiple ways for a family to consume that content, for them to learn from it. And so I just think that's incredible.
Yeah. And a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Thanks. Well, it's kind of fun because we have homeschool families that started with our content back in 2012. And like us, you have families that are large homeschool families. And so the older kids have gone through the content, and now the younger kids are going through the content. And I would imagine within probably 5 or 10 years, you'll have generational families going, oh, I want to show my kids, this awesome science series, or I don't know. There's a lot of content, but we continue to produce that. And the other thing that's kind of cool in what we're doing as far as Awesome Science Media is we're a content creator. And not only have we produced content that we own, but we work with other ministries to produce content for them. And so we are in the middle of finishing the season 3 of a series called Cashin's Wildlife at the Zoo for Answers in Genesis. That's on their platform. And Genesis Apologetics, we produce content for them. We were involved in a documentary called Ark in the Darkness, where I was the director of photography, that came out last year. And so it's exciting to be involved to help other ministries as well produce content.
Yeah, well, it's very compelling, and homeschool families definitely need this. My brother, who started his family sooner, homeschools, and this year I was asked to help teach essentially their government classes, which I thought, oh, sounds easy, right? I've worked in government for 20 years. And it wasn't long before I thought, boy, it would really be nice if I could just steal the material from somebody else and put my own spin on it. And as opposed to having to kind of come up with this stuff myself. And so having this, I'm sure, is a real resource for homeschool families, which is also a super growing, fast growing segment of our population. That used to be, when I was younger, I felt like there was a very marginal choice if a family was homeschooling.
And there was a bit of a stigma.
Yeah.
At least more so than today, that they,
and now we just see so much more of it. I think a lot of families, whether they're because of faith, they want to educate their own way, but there's also a lot of families who just don't trust the public school system to provide a quality product. And there's certainly a lot of time wasted in a typical school on unnecessary activities. We're spending so much time and effort on social engineering and so much less on actually educating our kids. And there's all sorts of politics involved in our public school system. So even when our teachers and others are really working their butts off to try to do their jobs, they're stymied by all the political machinations happening, or standardized testing, or whatever the next drama is, So, it's a really serving homeschool families it's a growing field. I think it's only going to get bigger.
I agree. There's two big things that happened in the last 10 years. One is COVID, where basically the whole educational system shut down.
Right.
And for the first time, for some parents, they were seeing what their kids were learning. And it was shocking to a lot of parents. And they're like, well, I don't want my kids learning this and the CRT and the sex ed and all of these things that were very blatant. The whole gender fluidity and the training there. And a lot of families, I believe, kind of the estimate before COVID was about 2 million homeschoolers in the nation. And I believe that's tripled at least, and it's growing. And so a lot of families are like, yeah, I think we can do this. And the popularity has grown. And I just want to touch too on what you said about a lot of students go in and there's a lot of wasted time. I know for us, we can usually do we're not rigid in the way that we homeschool. We don't sit them down and say, okay, for 3 hours, you're going to be doing this, or 2 hours. We work with them in different parts of the house and places. We give them assignments, and they're usually done, 2-3 hours at the most. And what's kind of cool is they can then pursue the passions that God has put on their heart. So for my oldest, it was speech and debate. For my second, it was computers and animation. And the other kids are picking up other talents and skills that they can do outside of the basics of learning, math and spelling and literature and so on. And they can follow those passions. And that's amazing. It's cool. It's kind of self-directed in a certain sense. I know that there are some homeschool programs that are more rigid, and maybe that's what your students need. But the beauty of homeschooling is you don't just sit them down, in a seat, and they have to stay there for 6 hours, 8 hours a day. There's a lot more passion that they can pursue and what God has for them to do. And it's exciting.
I agree. We're in that same boat where Kurt will tell you, we used to have passionate discussions about this, about what we would do when we had our family. And I didn't think I'd be somebody who would want to keep my kids home or homeschool or do some other, but there's co-ops and there's so much. And again, seeing it even outside the concerns of the quality or just the environment that they would be in. Again, it's just, you don't feel good about the wasted time and what I think we could do a better job. Not that I'm better or more qualified than these amazing teachers. That's not what I'm saying, but just with the system is broken. And so you want to take matters into your own hands and figure out a better alternative. So I'd love to switch gears, because something you were talking about right before this about helping others create content. I would love for our listeners to get your insights on what makes good content. You've got such a great background from documentaries. You've done so many different kinds. Help people understand what, in your mind, what makes for some good content. What's the formula that you use, or how can other people who care about this, like you said, content is king. How can other people do this successfully?
Well, I think the first question I always ask people, or even I consider when producing something, is who's my audience? Is it kids? Is it somebody that, if you have a product or a service, how does your product or service meet a need? What is their problem? What's their challenge? What's their struggle? I mean, you guys probably deal with this all the time as you work with your clients. And when it comes to the content for Awesome Science Media, what's the problem? Well, there's an absence. Absence. Yes, I think that's right. of that. I was thinking abscess, like tooth. It's like, that's not the right word. It's my brain's working too fast. And there was this place where the content really didn't exist to teach kids this. And so we met a need. That was their problem. That was their challenge. When it came to content and access, it's like, shoot, but now the big problem is we're not using DVDs anymore. Let's create a platform. So I think that's the first step, is to really think through, okay, what if you're not meeting the challenge or problem being addressed in the video, then it's kind of useless at that point. And when you look at the video, it's like in the next 30 seconds or less, in this world of quick videos, short videos, you need to really attract somebody and draw them in right away. That could be something that's a hook that is like humor or posing a question or so on, where you are trying to draw them in first. You need to be exciting, you need to be engaging. I think that content, whether it's a 30-second spot, whether it's an hour-and-a-half documentary, you just need to continue and answer that question. How does your product or service then help them solve their problem? But I think one of the challenges that some people run into with videos is they include too much information, and it's overload. And so there's this concept in television of a string, and basically the string needs to start at the beginning and go to the end. And essentially it's the message that you're telling. If you go away from that message or the string, you're going to confuse your audience. And so you need to just stay succinct. You need to be able to communicate that message and then show them how this solves their problem. And then, of course, you have a call to action. How do they get it? And so you'll see that formula used a lot in very successful commercials, where they use humor sometimes they use actors, sometimes they use a spokesperson, but all the way through, it's presenting, here, what is your problem? Maybe this is your problem. Well, this is how we solve it, and this is where you can get it. So when it comes to our content for science media, it's like, how do you answer the question about the Grand Canyon, where they say it was millions of years of form? Well, guess what? There is another answer, and we're going to show it to you. And then it's intriguing. You're drawing your audience in. And so you need to do that in every situation. I mean, even you guys in your podcast, you need to draw your audience in so that it's like, oh, okay, I do want to listen to this. This is how it will solve my problem. If you don't apply it to their lives, then they're just going to move on to the next video. I mean, video is easy to get out nowadays, but there's a lot of people with videos out there, and they're just going to scroll on to the next one.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about this too, and references in our book, but there's, it's so much easier to create content. And the bar gets lower and lower as technology advances, as these platforms advance. But it also just means that we are overwhelmed with options, and there's just a lot of noise and distractions. And so to your point, getting that hook, being succinct, I know we talk with clients that it's a real challenge, I think, when you're so passionate about what your product or service and what you're doing, to be succinct, to narrow it down, to focus on the one or two things that are going to make a difference, that are going to make the highest impact. And then, of course, you test and iterate that until you find the sweet spot. But everything you just said is exactly right, because there's so much noise out there. There's so many options that I think getting really good at that is so important for any business, I think, now in the modern age to succeed.
Mm-hmm. And anytime you can tell a story, through your video, story is what resonates with people. It touches their emotions. I love like testimonials of people that have used somebody's product or service, or watched a video and it's made it's done very well to impact them. Those are powerful because it's telling a story, and people can identify with the story. And I remember an artist years ago said, if you can get somebody to laugh, you can get them to cry. In other words, you're not trying to make them cry, but you're touching on their emotions and you're bringing them into your story. And then, of course, you can then present your product or service of how it meets their needs.
Yeah. And we all long for that connection, more so now than ever, again, because we're just inundated with content, with distractions, with so much going on. We're busier than we've ever been. And so I think that's so spot on what you've just said, because we all want to feel something. And again, what we argue again with Liberty Spenders in this effort is people are looking for that. They want that. They're asking for more of that from their brands and businesses and who they interact with.
Yeah, I think it was articulated. I'm going to steal this from our friend Scott Martin, who was talking to me about the idea in the modern marketing space. We've been so focused on attention and eyeballs for decades, really. How do we get people's attention? How do we get their eyeballs? But what seems to be emerging right now in the market is a growing importance of trust. So people aren't immediately going to believe everything they see on YouTube anymore or on television. They need to trust you, and building a trusting relationship with a potential customer is a different exercise. And that may come from what you're talking about, telling stories, having a testimonial, getting them to laugh, getting them to cry, because you've got to connect with them on that level. I don't know how many marketing conferences I've gone to where people throw up that Dollar Shave Club ad and talk about how like amazing it is. Every time they do it, I just want to puke. It worked once, and all of my clients want to replicate this. Let me do some funny video like this. I want to burst through a piece of paper and I want to shoot, fireworks or whatever, and that's going to get the job done. But I just don't know that that's really the case anymore.
Not in the long term.
Yeah. I mean,
not in the long term.
Customers want, you've got to, I love what you said, get them to come into your story, right? You've got to earn their trust. And that just doesn't come by bursting through some paper at the beginning of a Dollar Shave Club ad. It got some attention. And so applause to those who made it, right? And it really helped them break through. But those are 1,000,001, right? Like
you need both. Yeah. You need both. You need to get the eyeballs, but you can't. I mean, that's just a fad. It'll fade. And you need to build that relationship.
And that's probably being somebody who's produced so much story, documentaries, children's science content, commercial, corporate. Like you've gotten, finding a way to tell that story is something you've done over and over and over again. One of the challenges I find with my clients is most of them think they don't have one, right? They think, well, okay, I'm not as interesting as this person, right? I'm just boring old, John Doe. And how do you get, how in your experience, how do you get that story out of people? What exercise should they be going through to think, what is interesting about me or my business?
Usually when I work with corporate clients, one of the first things I do is I start with a bunch of questions. Who's your audience? Number one. Number two, what's worked in the past? What hasn't worked in the past? What's been successful? What hasn't been successful? Sometimes I ask them, if you could produce content, what would you want to produce? Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it's like, well, that's good. But, and then sometimes we brainstorm. I try and ask them about their audience specifically, their demographics. I try and do some research on, what's reaching them now. Some of my clients, they already have all this information and they just come to me with a script, to produce. And sometimes I might challenge them. It's like, well, you might consider going this direction instead. But I'm not one of those guys who comes in as a ego director and says, "Oh, let's scrap the whole thing. Let's do my idea. Because this is going to work." But what if it doesn't work? Then I don't look so good after that, right?
Yeah, that's the risk you take, being dictator for a day.
Yeah, right. So I try and collaborate, with all my clients. Sometimes they already have some ideas. We did really cool for Broadcom. They're a big chip maker, multi-billion-dollar company. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to create these a series. Well, we started with one, but it's called the 𝗕𝗂𝗶𝘁𝗵 series, and it was all animation. But we told a story, but it was narrated. There was no actors coming in and giving voices and so on. But it was all visually put together as a cartoon, and it was so well received. We ended up doing 2 more, and then another division wanted to create a similar series for them, and so it really depends, although you could not use that necessarily for 20 episodes or so on, because it wears out. And like you said, sometimes there's fads that come in that used to be, and to me, I saw it as a fad that probably wasn't going to last too long, but it's like a chalkboard. So you saw like a hand and it was writing story and so on. And I'm like, this is going to get old pretty quick, and I would have clients say, hey, I think I want to do the chalkboard thing. And I was like, well, consider this, that probably isn't going to catch people's attention like it used to. Every producer wants to be in that place of creating like the new thing that everyone else follows and so on. Back in the Northwest where we're at, I don't know if you guys ever saw it, but there was a series of ads called Trunk Monkeys. And
I don't think so.
Oh, you got to look that up.
So.
It's hilarious. It was an auto dealer, and it was hilarious where, I don't know how they did it, but they got these pet monkeys in the television spots. And the idea was that, like, if you send your daughter out on a date or whatever, and she has the car, and there's things that maybe happen that shouldn't happen, she can press this button, and monkeys come out of the back seat or out of the trunk into the car, and they attack the guy. But there's a series of these, and they were so well received that they started franchising those spots in other markets and stuff. And I would have loved to have been the guy that came up with the concept, but you can't. It's only going to get. The life of that is the shelf life is going to end there. So, so it's constantly come up with new ideas. But I think the overall concept is story. You're telling a story, as we mentioned before. And so a client that doesn't feel like they're very interesting, to the audience. So maybe we don't use them, but again, we drill into their audience and how to reach their audience and what challenges do they have, and then how does that product or service solve that? And then kind of brainstorm and come up with, do we use a cartoon series? Do we do testimonials? Do we create a bunch of kids talking to the camera? It's just, there's fun things you can do. And like you said, a lot of the times you have to test it and then iterate off that and try something new. And once you have that, then you can really move forward on producing a few more of those and creating an audience for those things.
Yeah, there's always a story to tell. It's just taking the patience and looking at it from every angle to find out what that is and what's the best way to tell it. And yeah, there's so many people, they just don't think, I'm not interesting enough. I'm not exciting enough. And we all know that's just malarkey. There's always a story to tell.
Yeah, well, sometimes the story is I'm not exciting.
I mean, that can be pretty entertaining as well, right? There's a lot of political campaigns about that.
In politics, one of the most famous ads from one of our best friend and ad makers, Fred Davis, is an ad called "One Tough Nerd." And so that was the idea, was this is a boring, nerdy guy who's running for governor, right? And that's what made it interesting, the fact that he was a nerd. Right?
Yeah, you just run up a score on that. You don't try to change what's true.
Yeah.
Well, one quick question I wanted to ask, I know we'll pivot into another section, but if you could try to dilute, and I'm putting you on the spot here, but if you could try to identify what are some of the big mistakes you then see people making, right? So you're talking about telling a story and what people are trying to do. Help people know, okay, this is what, maybe it's even major brands that you see doing, but what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people, making right now when they're building their content?
one is you're not addressing somebody's challenge or problem right away. You're telling a nice story. You're doing maybe brand, recognition. If you're a vineyard, you can show, the nice vineyards and aerial shots and so on. But, does it solve a problem? I think, yeah, if you have a lot of money, you can produce all these image ads and so on, and people go, oh yeah, I really like that brand, but how does it solve my problem? I don't know. I think a lot of smaller companies, they have limited budgets, so they can't produce all this, great content that's more image rather than solving somebody's problem. So I think that's the big thing is you need to very, very quickly identify your customer's challenge and then how to solve that problem. Using story, that's a great way to start. I think the other thing that people run into is, I've had clients, and I mentioned this a little bit before, is they have too much information they want to share. And instead of a 30-second or a minute spot, it becomes a 3-minute or 5-minute video. And it just kind of runs on, and you lose your audience. I really believe that you can produce a 3 to 5 minute video as long as it keeps people's attention. And there's different ways to do that. Change of music, keeping your shots down to 3 seconds a piece, creating energy where people are caught into it and they really like it. But if it's boring, they're using low key music, that the shots are lasting 5 to 10 seconds, people are going to lose interest real quick. But I think you can. I think you can keep a video going longer as long as you keep their interest. But the shorter videos really are the ones that are most successful, especially on social media and other places.
Well, that's a great little tidbit. So I hope people were taking notes. Thank you for sharing that. What not to do.
Yes.
Well, I know all of these things you're doing, it certainly at the beginning may have felt like a leap of faith, right? You're going to start building and making content. For an organization like Answers in Genesis, or anybody starting their own business or own operation, that's a moment of trepidation. And I love to talk to people of faith about, how did, what drew you to that? What was there a moment where you felt like God intervened, maybe a hopeless moment when you thought, I don't know if we're going to be able to pay bills next month, but then God came through. What's been your experience as you've built this out?
Yeah, boy, as most people know who are running small businesses, it's feast or famine, and you wish it weren't, but you have to be passionate. You have to feel called to what you're doing. Probably my biggest God moment, though, was when we were back in 97, when I first really got into doing kids programming and the story of science in the Bible. I was working full-time for the Family Channel, International Family Entertainment, Marriage High and More Entertainment, all owned by the same company. But I saw the Bill Nye Show, and I was also teaching as an adjunct at Regent University. It was all in Virginia. And I saw Bill Nye Show, and this new kids animated series called VeggieTales was just coming out, and it was just entertaining. It was fun. And I don't know, I think God put it in my heart. It's like, hey, I want you to do a Bill Nye Show, but focus on science in the Bible, and specifically on dinosaurs as I looked into it. And I had a student in my class that was a graduate student, but he was extremely talented as a writer. So I said, hey, would you write me a script? So we did. And then I was looking for talent, somebody to host it, and found this through different connections, found this guy in Kentucky that was working for this small ministry. And I went out there and I kind of tried him out and so on. And he says, you got to sit down with my bosses and present this project because I think they'd really like it. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah. So it was like an opportunity. And I sat down with these two guys, the founders of the ministry. And after my short presentation, they're like, one of our board members was saying the other day, we need to get into kids programming. And I think you would fund this thing. And those two guys are Ken Ham and Mike Zovath. two of the three founders of Answers in Genesis.
I was like, who's that? Yeah.
Yeah. They have the Creation Museum now, the Ark, they're multi-million dollar, ministry. But back then, they were just getting started in an office building and such. So that to me just spoke that, God was intervening. He was setting up opportunities, and that kind of set me on a course, for that direction. I know that when I started my company in 99, my first big project was producing a documentary that aired on ESPN on the history of golf in America called the Game That Defined a Century. And I thought, I've made it. I'm going to do great, and then 6 months, hardly any work that all came in, And and so that up and down, the feast or famine, and there was one point where we went 5 or 6 months of very little income. Had a couple car payments and a mortgage and so on, and just cried out, Lord, what is going on? I had a corporate project for a local university college in Portland, and nobody could sign the paperwork to get the project going. It was like $10,000 to $20,000 project, and we could have used that, but it got delayed. And quite frankly, to be really honest, in one day we lost both of our cars. They repossessed them,
Wow.
And there was a little bit that I owed the government, and they showed up, saying, "Hey, you need."
Oh my goodness!
And the funny thing, God's grace is, as they showed up on our doorstep, the IRS, they were towing away our cars, and it gave extra grace, But my wife turned to me because she wasn't sold on the whole idea of being.
You mean the IRS gave you extra grace? Is that what you said?
Yes, they did. Yeah,
they took pity. They said, "Oh, this is a bad day for you."
Yeah, it really was. It was, and that was that lowest point, I think, in my business career as an independent business owner. And of course, my wife, she was like, "So, are you going to go get a job now?"
Right.
And I was like, "Yeah, probably." But that passion to do what I felt God called me to do, I didn't know. And then the next morning, I was just praying. And it's like, Lord, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to get a job? Do you want me to keep going? And I just felt this burning passion in me that, no, I want you to keep going on this. And I'm like, what am I going to tell my wife? Tell her that this is what you're saying.
Yeah, can you please make sure you're talking to her? Yeah, help me out here.
I did, and she was like, okay, and within a week or two, we had that big contract, from there. And it wasn't until about 10 years later into the business, my wife finally said, I think I really understand the value of having a business. And I'm like, wow. But I think if I would have gone to work for somebody else, who knows if we would have started in our science content. But I think because we were independent, because we homeschooled, because we could travel anytime, anywhere, we eventually bought an RV. We're now in our second RV, and we travel as a family. We've created some amazing memories. And, looking back, it's exciting to see that. But there's still times when it's like, okay, in 2 months, what are we going to be doing, for the next big project and so on. And so, my goal with our platform is to create it enough to where it could sustain us, income wise. I haven't tried to depend upon that.
So we've learned now several more things about you, and also that you must have an amazing wife, because I'm sure she was nervous about that. And it's amazing when you can be equally yoked, and I'm sure have that support of your partner, because that had to have been a tough time deciding, do I continue with this or not? And then, of course, how it turned out. And it doesn't always mean that when those things happen that it's going to be roses and sunshine. But we try to be faithful. So I'm glad that you made that decision.
Yeah, it's one that we look back on and realize that God was directing us. And we've done that several times in our marriage, where we just got on our knees, cried out, and said, Lord, this doesn't feel good. What do you really want us to be doing? Are we not doing the right thing? And even the first year of our marriage back in 91, just things were not working out real well. And we cried out to the Lord. We were living in Portland. And like the next morning, this is like when we were going to bed. The next morning, we got this call from this guy that I worked for at Moody Bible Institute, because there was a student back in the late 80s. And he was like, "Hi, I don't know if you're interested in this, but we have this position open. And would you be interested?" And it's like, wow. So God does answer those type of prayers.
Right.
And in a situation where, we lost the cars and the IRS showed up, that I just cried out to the Lord. And, but yeah, she was like, "Okay, all right, this is the direction we're going to go." And that still hasn't been easy, at times. There's definitely been challenges from time to time, but, we look back and we see how God did provide and God directed us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, sometimes I feel like God's directed me to buy an RV as well.
Oh, go for it.
I'm not sure if it's God directing when that's something you want to do anyway. I'm not sure how that works, right?
I'd like to get on the road and I want to do it in luxury, big, giant RV kind of thing.
Oh boy. Yeah.
But
we always bought used, which is good.
Yes.
We didn't buy brand new. And I do a lot of the maintenance, so that helps too. So, but their work.
I'm bad with maintenance. That's one hit against me here. I think I can figure out how to change my own oil if I worked. Last time I tried to do it, I stupidly set my car up on an incline. I had it on, had lifted it up so I could get under it, and it fell, kind of rolled off of the supports, and I got out from under it just in time.
Wow.
I'm a dangerous person to have doing stuff like that. But, God has protected me. That's one good example. I should not forget. He probably I don't fully appreciate how close that was. But, humans are stupid, I guess.
The beauty of it is YouTube is a great resource for doing repairs. It's like, how do I change this? How do I change the rotor on my front tire of my RV? It's like, I'll go look it up. And somebody's done it, and they put it on video. So,
yeah. Well, my brother's that kind of guy. He fixes a lot of his own stuff. And
it's okay. You have other gifts. It's all right.
I have other gifts.
It's all right. It's okay.
Yes.
It's okay.
Well, this has been great. And I wanted to, we like to do a little lightning round as we finish each episode, and do 3 questions, about 90 seconds each. It's okay if you do 95 seconds. There's no buzzer.
Okay.
But I like to ask, what's the legacy you'd like to leave behind from your business, like Awesome Science Media? What legacy?
The legacy of Awesome Science Media is I really desire that, families and kids have a solid foundation so that when they go into the world, whether it's a university or the business world or whatever they do, they have an answer. They have answers. And that's a legacy that I want to leave, so that they are solid in their faith. We've seen over the last 5 years some prominent people step away and deconstruct their faith. And part of the reasons they give is they didn't feel like they had adequate answers about scientific issues and evolution and naturalism. And so the legacy I want to leave is that people would grow up and go, okay, I do have answers, and I don't have to leave the faith because I know that God's word is true. I want, my kids also to walk in those ways. And it's exciting to see them take those answers. We were at Dinosaur National Monument a few years ago, and I was like, "Where's my kids?" And they're like flanking around one of the national parks people, and they're like debating them on dinosaurs in the Bible. And I'm like, that's the legacy that I love to leave with my kids, is they have the answers and they're confident in that. And so I think overall, I don't want to see people walk away from the faith because they don't have answers. And so I think that's the legacy I want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I also love, this is one of my favorite questions I like to ask, is what's something that's caught your attention recently that's not related to your business and your work? Maybe it's a hobby, a topic you're obsessing about, or a sports team you're into. what's got your attention recently?
Oh boy. Several things. I love to study world events and biblical prophecy. And so when I see things happening around us, what's going on with Israel, what's going on with the countries that are rising up against them. We talk about this a lot as a family. In fact, right now our family Bible study is Ezekiel. And in chapters 38 and 39, there's this war that happens in Israel that's kind of end times. And so to me, that's one of my passions as well, is to study, world events and then to talk about with my kids and to say, okay, what times are we living in? Is our salvation going to be, finishing on this earth here pretty soon? But also the kind of the place that it then takes you is like, okay, what can I be doing? What am I called to do right now? And not just sit around and hunker down and go, well, let's just, stay here until Jesus comes. It's like, how can I be the good steward that walks into heaven? And Jesus says, well done, good and faithful servant. So it's that process. It's motivating when you study world events. And then it's like, wow, what can I do? Because the times are going to be quick. And so that's a passion of mine. That's outside of work, but it does relate in some aspects.
Yeah. Well, you immediately piqued my interest about Ezekiel. That was my reading today. I'm doing the major prophets right now. And
that's what you were looking at.
And I was thinking, was I in Ezekiel 38? I was actually in Ezekiel 10 this morning. Yeah. And it's one of those books of the Bible I have to read with a commentary right next to me, right? I'm reading about the wheels and the wheels, and thinking, okay, this is, what does this mean? What historical context do I need to understand there? And like you, what I come back with as I'm reading Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Isaiah, I come back to the same thing, which is that the things that God was upset about with the Israelites when Jeremiah and Isaiah and Ezekiel were alive all exist today. And he's looking for people who are willing to be cross-cultural or cross-currents and say, you know what, I want to live a life dedicated to God, not greed, not selfishness, not immorality in various ways. And that's what, in the midst of all the prophecy that's sometimes hard to fully comprehend, and I come away with, there's a call for holiness here that's so powerful and important. And to your point, fast moving, right? I think maybe in real time, it all feels like maybe this is going to happen sometimes far off in the future, or the consequences of our behavior as a society, or maybe that'll, long after I'm dead, those chickens will come to roost. But then when you try to think about, oh no, the things that were happening in the Old Testament are happening here and now. And so I get that. Well, I always like to also, that we're here to help you. And so I always like to end with, we got to get a good 60, 90 second pitch for awesome science media, or maybe it's 𝗕𝗂, your work, your company that does work for businesses. So do a quick pitch for the final moments here.
I'll try and do both real quick. With 𝗕𝗂 Media, we're here to help these companies that are trying to go after liberty spenders to create great content, compelling content, to help them get their products and services out there. And we can produce great content that gets results. And we're excited to help companies do that. With Awesome Science Media, we want to be in a place to provide tools for children, for kids, for homeschool families, churches, to solidify people's faith in the Word of God, but not just by telling them, you need to believe this, but by showing them the evidence for their faith, that they can stand on science from a biblical worldview, and that there's solid evidence for that, and that we provide the tools and the resources and the videos to engage our audience so that they are able to take in this information and apply it to their lives and use it to be strong in their faith as they grow into adulthood.
Well, that's powerful. We're so thankful that you came and joined us. For those who want to get in touch with Kyle, hit him up on awesomesciencemedia.com, and you can learn more about Awesome Science, but also, talk to him if your business is looking for some support.
Yeah, and I think what you're offering is fantastic, Kyle. So again, it's really an honor to have you on. And I hope our listeners were taking some notes and can look at your work and benefit from that, and absolutely reach out and work with this man. He's got an amazing track record, and I know you have a lot to offer. So thank you for joining us as well. And for those of you tuning in, we appreciate your attention. We invite you to join the Liberty Partnership community at libertyspenders.com. Again, you can get our new best-selling book, also called Liberty Spenders. You can get it there at libertyspenders.com/free. And if you have found value in this episode, please don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything in the future. And until next time, thanks for joining.